This is episode 9 of my Essential Information series. In previous episodes, I've shown you how to cook with prep. I've shown you how to cook on a kerosene stove, but I've never shown you how to restore an old one. So this one is going to be about how to restore an old Perfection kerosene stove. In this case, it's a 1957 Hupp Perfection 2-burner economy stove. Here is a page from the 1957 Hupp Perfection dealer literature showing the K12 2-burner economy stove. The single and 2 burners are very hard to find because generally families were larger back then than they are today, and they had the 3, 4, and 5 burners. So it's very hard to find a 2-burner. I found it on Craigslist, and I talked the guy into disassembling it, boxing it up, and shipping it to me. And this is what it looked like when it arrived. The legs were rusty. It probably sat in water. The burners looked like they had a lot of use. The jug looks like kerosene sat in it forever and it dried. It's going to take some work. The top, luckily there is no porcelain because it's an economy stove, so it's a lot easier to restore black paint than it is porcelain. So I'm looking at the legs here, and you can see where they had taken just a brush and some black paint and slopped it on, and they had taken some gray and sprayed the backsplash. Well, the first thing to do is get the wicks out, and obviously there was water and dried kerosene, and it was a mess. However, they did come out, but you can see that they've been very much abused. So those go in the trash. You can't do anything with them. And then you look at the bowl that holds the kerosene jug. Problem is, it looks like the whole thing was underwater because not only is there dried kerosene, but there is rust. So maybe they were trying to burn a mixture of kerosene and water. Don't know. But that's got to get fixed. Then the burner clamps are loosened and removed, and the burners are popped off. There's a lot of dried kerosene on them, indicating that it was used a lot and never cleaned. And then the fuel well with its attached kerosene pipe is out and just laying there. Now here's how the burners attach to the fuel pipe. There's a little bit of lead around that orifice, and the burners set on top, and then that clamp in the lower part of the image holds everything together. Now here is a close-up of the orifice and the lead seal that the burner sets down on top of. Since there was rust in the orifice, we decided to take a look at the mating part of the burner. As you can see, there's rust in there. And then I decided to take a look at the end of the kerosene feed pipe where the bung is. So I unscrewed that, and as you can see, the feed pipe is half full of rust. So I'm just wondering if this thing may be laid on its side in water, or the cellar flooded, or left under the eaves. Don't know, but that's a lot of rust. So with the burners off, and I derusted them, then I had to polish them. Some I did on our buffing station, some I did by hand, but we used a metal polish made in Germany. It's called Simichrome. I've got a big container of it because I go through so much of it, but it cleaned them up pretty good. They're not brand new, but they look a whole lot better than they did when we started. Next, the collars and flame spreaders went on the brass wire wheel that's on the other side of our buffer, and cleaned them up, and then sprayed them with VHT very high heat black paint. And then the kerosene well and the kerosene feed pipe was painted with the VHT 250 degree roll bar and chassis gloss black paint. Then I turned my attention to the legs. I wet sanded the legs to take the drips from that black paint where they had used a brush and just slopped it on. Got that cleaned up, then wire brushed the ends of the legs because it certainly looks like the thing sat in water, and then sprayed down the rusty area with the Rust-Oleum Rusty Metal Primer. Then I gave them a good coat of the Rust-Oleum Appliance Epoxy Gloss White. It will harden just like epoxy or porcelain, and it takes about 3 days to fully dry, but it gives a very nice finish. Next, I turned my attention to the basic body of the 2-burner stove. That had to be completely wet sanded and cleaned up, ready for paint. And luckily, because we're not dealing with any porcelain finish, we can just repaint it. Although the Schwartz company does sell replacement tops that are identical to the old ones that they put on their new ones, so for about $150 I could have a brand new porcelain top if I wanted it. So then I started painting the cabinet. I started with VHT 900 degree caliper paint for the top surface. The sides were engine enamel at 550 degrees, and the interior bottom was your standard 250 degree roll bar and chassis paint. Again, all three are VHT and high gloss. And it doesn't look too bad at this point, considering what we started out with. Now, one of the things that's the toughest about putting these together is finding original hardware or reproduction hardware that looks original. They have to be square nuts, and they have to be, I believe it's called truss head screws. The place that we found them was Fastenal. So as you can see on the screen, you got to get some of the 37 614 10 by 24 square nuts and the 27 458 10 by 24 by ½ inch truss head screws. These are as close to what the original Perfection Factory used as you can find today. Because generally on these stoves, you have to pretty much hacksaw the nuts off because everything is so rusted, and just toss everything. And so that's why we did a search, and Fastenal definitely has the hardware. However, our local Fastenal store will not let anybody in the building unless you are a commercial customer. They've pretty much given up on the individual going in and buying some hardware. So with the reproduction hardware, it was a simple matter to put the legs on. And as you can see, it looks pretty much like it did in 1957 at this point. Then I installed the kerosene well and feed tube, and then put the burners on and dropped in new wicks from Schwartz Manufacturing. And then I installed the original chimneys, and I had to put in 2 new sheets of mica, again from Schwartz. Or you could get the new wicks and the mica from milesstair.com, or they can be had at Shetler's Wholesale or Lehman's in Kidron, Ohio. In fact, if you want to see these wicks being made, I took a trip to the factory a few years back in Bern, Indiana at Schwartz Manufacturing, and I did one of my first videos. It was called 331X Wick Production, and on the bottom of the screen you can see the original address if you want to see them making wicks on the original pre-World War II equipment. Next was the stove grates. They came in gray. I didn't really care for the gray. In fact, the original top was gray that somebody had painted black. Well, I prefer black over the gray. So what I ended up doing was I bought some stove polish. There's many brands. I just kind of like Williams. It's old school. It works. And I steel wooled the grates and then applied a couple coats of the Williams stove polish. You have to put it on every now and again because it does burn off, but it does work. And it's what would have been used back in the day. So now the stove is ready to be test burnt, except for the backsplash. I haven't got that on yet. So I set it up, and you can see it doesn't set perfectly level. Either it's the floor in the old room, or the legs aren't just quite right. But some shims for a temporary setup, it'll work. Filled the jug, set it on, and let the wicks get wet. And then I lit it. And as you can see, I had 2 nice blue burns, which was what I was hoping for, and no leaks. Because the old burners, if they've been manhandled, the solder joints can crack and leak. These did not. So finally I had to do the backsplash. Now the backsplash, that Perfection logo was painted on. So I've got a problem. How do I reproduce that? So I talked to a lot of people, and the best I could come up with is you wet sand all the white, then you spray it. Be careful not to go directly over the Perfection logo. So you're going to keep some of the original paint around the logo, but you spray around it, and any overspray, you immediately take Q-tips and rubbing alcohol and go over and remove the white paint from that logo. And of course, on the sides, the little mounts, they have to have the Fastenal bolts, and that has to be painted black, of course, those brackets. And as we zoom in, you can see there is a little bit of a difference, but it's as good as I'm ever going to be able to get it around the Perfection. So there it is, now fully assembled with the backsplash, ready to be used. It's not a museum piece, as you've seen in my other videos. I actually use the thing. So these are the basics on how to restore most any Perfection or Ivanhoe or Schwartz stove. Other brands may be different, but this is how you do a Perfection.